How to install Docker and Portainer on Proxmox. This is a video that I felt would be pretty useful for you guys as we dig into some shorts to talk about Docker. We're not going to be diving too deep into Docker. We'll be going through what I consider to be the fundamentals. What are Docker images, Docker networking, and Docker bind mounts. And after that, we'll move on to Kubernetes and other stuff I find pretty interesting. But if you're watching those videos and you want to follow along, I am using a Proxmox stack to run the different labs for these videos. And I'm also running some of these services in production. All right, so I got Docker installed, and I'm going to teach you how to get Docker installed. And I also found this useful service that I've used on and off again for years, known as Portainer. It lets you manage Docker images as well as Docker servers, right? So it's a very useful tool. And I thought I'd share how to set it up with you guys. Behind me, I have a diagram of our final setup. Let's take a look at it. As you can see, we're going to have a Proxmox cluster, and this Proxmox cluster is going to have one virtual machine that is going to be running Docker. This container right here is going to let us manage our Docker host and eventually other Docker hosts we might want to spin up inside of our cluster, this side of the screen. So I thought it would be worthwhile to show you the final result of what exactly we're trying to set up here. And that is Portainer. Behind me, we have my production environment of Portainer, right? It's where I have a lot of my services moved over to. What I find really cool about this is that it only took me about a day or two for me to migrate my services from FAT Linux containers to Docker images. So behind me, you can see my Portainer setup, and you can see the various Docker containers I have running here. What I like about it is its management interface. So each one of these are its own Docker container, and these containers can be organized by their name, their state, or their stack, which is a very useful feature. And what this does is it gives you a high-level overview of the various containers. And if you organize by stack and you build out your containers by stack, you also get a high-level overview of your containers. For instance, I have a Grafana stack here, which is 2 containers, InfluxDB and Grafana. And I can go in and sort by that and click into those 2 containers and make changes to them on the fly if I needed to. Right, I could change the port I'm serving out the traffic on up here. I could change my logging down here. I could add additional volumes, network settings, environment variables, labels. There's a lot of different things I can do with Portainer. These are all things you can do with Docker and the Docker command line. Portainer is just another layer on top of that that makes the management of Docker easier. Between Portainer and Docker Compose, I was able to get more or less my services spun up in, like I said, a day or two. Like I said a few minutes ago, if you want to actually get this spun up in your own environment, you're going to need a Debian virtual machine. We're spinning one up right now inside of one of my test environments. So it looks like it's taking a sweet time. We'll let this finish installing and we'll be right back and we'll proceed. So step 1 of this video is get Debian installed in the virtual machine. See you when you've completed that step. So we're back and we have a Debian installed. Let's proceed from here with getting Docker installed. The process for getting Docker installed is pretty straightforward. I pulled these instructions from the Docker wiki, and we'll actually be pulling up the Docker wiki inside of our console here. So the easiest way to get Docker installed is just to go to the Docker wiki and copy the install steps from there. So let's do Docker Debian. And you can swap Debian out with whatever distro you prefer. Let's just go right here. You know you're at the right page when you see this install Docker engine on Debian. What you want to do is just scroll down and you want to follow the steps to install the Docker app repository. But first you're going to need to install some packages. So let's do a quick apt-get install. That's why sudo curl wget. I'll let that run real quick. Once you have curl wget and sudo installed, you can basically just copy paste these steps right here. So step 1 is getting the Docker app repository installed. You can just copy this portion, go back to your terminal as an admin and paste and give that a few minutes for it to install the CA certificates package and create your key rings. Then you're gonna add your Docker repository to your app sources when this is done. So it looks like it's done. You just copy and paste again. And when it's done adding the repository, it'll do a quick apt update. Then you copy this command to install the latest Docker, to install Docker CE and some Docker plugins. And you hit paste one more time, and that should get Docker installed. You hit Y, make sure it's installed. And that's it. We're making good progress here, boys. We can then do a system CTL status Docker. As you can see, it's up and running. And then what we want to do is enable it so it starts at restart. And then we can confirm Docker is running by doing a Docker run hello world. Now look at that. It pulls down the Docker image and we get a hello from Docker. Now we're not done yet. What we need to do then is add a user. So we're going to do a user mod. So we're going to do a user add. We'll call this Docker admin. And we'll just give this a password and we'll retype in that password. Okay. And we'll set Docker admin to have a shell. So we'll do a user mod -s bin bash Docker admin. And then we will add Docker admin to our Docker group. And with that, we should now build a login to Docker admin. And it should be able to run Docker. And then from there, we can get Portainer installed. So let's just log out real quick. So we are logged back in as Docker admin. And if we were to do a Docker run hello world, you see we now are able to run Docker for a new admin account. This is important because we're going to use this Docker admin to create our Portainer account. We could do that. We can get Portainer up and running by using a Docker run. If we were to do a Docker run -d -p and we were to pass through the port we wanted to run Portainer on, let's do 8,000 to 8,000. Then we want to pass through another port, which is 9443 to 9443. I want to pass through a name of Portainer. And we want to pass through a restart policy of always. And we want to pass through a volume of var run docker.sock to var run docker.sock. Then we want to pass through another volume of Portainer data to /data. And then the container we want to pull, and then the container image we want to pull is Portainer CE latest. And we just hit enter and we let that run. We can then run a Docker PS. And you'll notice right here that we have a Portainer container running on port 9443. So we should be able to access Portainer on this machine by first logging into, well, it says Firefox isn't working. So let's get the IP address of this virtual machine real quick. Its IP is 1104. So we should be able to pull up Portainer at 192.168.1.104.9443. Let's see here. There we go. And there we go. We were able to pull up a new Portainer instance at that IP. And of course, we just set up our password. Oh, it needs to be a little stronger. And then we create our user. And there we go. Once you get Portainer up and running, you can then go into environments, and you should have a local environment that points to var run docker sock. So let's go back home, and there you go. Inside of your Portainer local environment should be a few containers. In this case, it is the Portainer container, and then the two hello world containers we spun up. So we can remove those, and Portainer is now up and running. So relatively easy service to get up and running, assuming you already have Docker or CentOS or another Linux server spun up. It's just as simple as you adding the Docker app sources, which you can get from the Docker wiki. You running an apt-get update, and then you just pull the Docker packages, which you can also get from the Docker wiki. And that's it as far as the Portainer section goes. That's how you get Docker and Portainer spun up on a virtual machine in Proxmox. But wait, there is more. You should take advantage of some of Proxmox's highly available features. For instance, if you were to go and turn replication on for this virtual machine, you can do once a day. So the disk I have this living on isn't have replication available. That's fine. We'll hop back over to my actual infra, and you'll notice this Portainer virtual machine has replication on with one of my hosts, which is PV heavy, and it replicates every 2 hours. And that basically lets me keep this container, this virtual machine, highly available. For instance, I can migrate this virtual machine to PV heavy, and it shouldn't take too long as it had a replication pretty recently. And if it hasn't had one recently, it should still only take probably less than 15 or 20 minutes. It's not that big of a virtual machine yet. So we've started the migration. As you can see, it's migrating at a pretty decent rate here. It looks like it's doing about a gigabyte. Well, it's doing 500 megabytes a second. So this is moving pretty quick. And then we can hop back over to our Portainer install, and it's still going to stay up, right? Even though this virtual machine is being migrated from one instance to another, all my containers running on it are going to maintain available. And this is useful, especially when you have just one virtual machine running one container. But as you scale up later to stuff like Kubernetes and Docker Swarm, having your containers and services running gives you another layer of availability and reliability. So keep that in mind. And that is it, boys. That is how you spin up Docker and Portainer on Proxmox, and why you might want to do that. You know, Proxmox has some highly available features that make Docker really an attractive choice here, right? Otherwise, thank you for watching. I appreciate your attention for a few minutes. Stay blessed, boys. I'll see y'all around.